Have you noticed that a simple burger meal in Australia now costs almost double what it did just a few years ago, and nobody in this country seems willing to explain exactly why? You sit in your car at the drive-thru, you read the total on the screen, and something inside your chest tightens because that number does not match the memory you have of what fast food is supposed to be. That feeling is not in your head. It is not you being dramatic. It is the honest, measurable truth of what has been quietly happening at every counter, every app, and every delivery window across this country for the last several years. And today you're going to see it laid out in a way that finally makes sense of it. Before I go one step further, do me a small favor, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and send this video to the one friend in your group chat who always says fast food is a ripoff now. Because they are right, and this is the video that finally proves it with real numbers. Every share pushes this deeper into the country. And the more Australians who see this, the harder it becomes for these chains to keep pretending nothing is going on. Now, let us begin with something simple. Think back to the year 2000. A Big Mac in Australia cost around $1.54. Today, that same burger sits at roughly $5.70. That is a jump of 270%. And more than 17% of that increase landed in the last 12 months alone. Read that sentence again slowly. A single burger, made by the same company using the same recipe in the same country, has climbed in price faster than almost anything else you can buy at a shop. This is not slow, gentle inflation. This is something else entirely, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now compare that to what has happened in other countries over the same window. In Japan, the price of a Big Mac has moved up by only around 9% across more than 2 decades. In Vietnam, it has barely moved at all. So when someone tells you that these price hikes are just global inflation doing its normal thing, they are either not looking at the data, or they are hoping you will not look at it either. Australia is not caught in a worldwide storm. Australia is standing directly under its own private thundercloud, and the rain is falling straight into your wallet. Here is where it gets interesting. The whole reason fast food ever existed was to be cheap, quick, and reliable in that exact order. Take away the cheap part, and the entire promise collapses. You're no longer buying a bargain. You're buying convenience at restaurant prices, eaten out of a paper bag, sometimes in a car park. That is not what this industry was built to be, and Australians are finally starting to notice. Let us talk about Hungry Jack's for a moment, because most people do not actually know who owns it. It is not run by the American parent company of Burger King. It is run by a private Australian business called Competitive Foods Australia, controlled by a businessman named Jack Cowan, who locked in the master franchise rights all the way back in 1971. That company reported around $2.5 billion in revenue in its most recent financial year, along with a 37% jump in net profit. Read that number one more time. 37%. In the same year, Australians were complaining that a burger meal was starting to feel like a small robbery. That is not a coincidence. That is the model working exactly as intended. And they do not just sell the food, they control the supply chain too. Competitive Foods runs its own meat processing operations, including a facility in Brisbane built specifically to produce the beef patties that end up in your Whopper. So when you tap your card at Hungry Jack's, the money is not simply flowing overseas. A large portion of it is landing in the pockets of one of the biggest private restaurant empires in the country. One that is quietly setting record profits while telling you that prices have to keep going up because costs are rising. Both things cannot be equally true. Something in that story does not add up. Move over to McDonald's, and the story becomes even louder. Walk in today, order a Big Mac meal, no extras, no fancy add-ons, just the classic combo. Depending on the store, you are looking at anywhere between $15 and $18. A few short years ago, the same meal sat under $10 in most capital cities, and you would still walk out with change from a 20. Now line that new price up next to a lunch special at your local pub or a small cafe around the corner. The gap has almost vanished. In some cases, the pub meal is actually cheaper, and it comes on a real plate, with real cutlery, sometimes with a side salad, and always with a chair to sit on. That is the moment the whole idea of fast food quietly breaks. If the price advantage disappears, all that is left is speed, and speed alone has never been a strong enough reason to pay restaurant money for something you eat in your car. The scary part is that no single moment triggered this. Nobody stood up and announced a huge price rise. It happened $1 at a time. 50 cents here, a menu refresh there, small enough to slip past you week after week, big enough, when added up, to feel like a slap when you finally do the maths. And speaking of maths, before we go deeper, I want you to pause for just a second and do something small but powerful. Drop a comment right now with the exact meal you used to order at the drive-thru and how much it costs you now. One line. That is all I need. Those comments become proof. They become a record. They become the kind of thing that companies actually read when their PR teams are scanning to see how loud the noise is getting. Your one comment is a vote, and votes and numbers change things. Now let us turn to KFC, because if you thought Macca's was climbing fast, KFC has been sprinting. Industry analysis from investment bank UBS found that prices across KFC's Australian menu rose by an average of nearly 15% in a single year, while McDonald's moved by around 8% in that same window. Individual items tell the story even more sharply. The Zinger Burger Combo, one of the most famous items on the entire menu, climbed from around $8.95 in the middle of 2022 to $10.95. A 6-piece nugget pack jumped by 25% in 1 year. 25%. On nuggets. That is not chicken suddenly becoming rare. That is a business decision, calmly made in a boardroom, then quietly rolled out at the counter. The reason it happens so easily is because most KFC stores in Australia are run by a publicly listed company called Collins Foods. When a company answers to shareholders, its first loyalty is not to the family sitting in the car park, deciding whether they can afford a bucket. Its first loyalty is to the number on the earnings report. Rising costs are not absorbed, they are handed down the line. And you, the customer, are always the last link in that chain. You do not get a vote in the meeting, you just get a higher price. Then there is Domino's. This one is important because it is one of the few times in recent memory that Australian customers actually pushed back and won. In July of 2022, Domino's slipped in a 7% delivery service fee on top of standard menu prices. It sounded small on paper, just a little extra to help with delivery costs. That was the story. Customers did not buy it. They stopped ordering. First half profits collapsed by 28%. The share price fell 24% in a single day, then kept sliding for weeks, eventually dropping close to 30% below where it had started. The company was forced to scrap the fee entirely in June of 2023, and the chief executive publicly admitted the delivery pricing had been a serious mistake. Read that whole story carefully because the lesson is enormous. The fee itself was not huge. It was the principle that broke people. Customers did not resent the extra dollar. They resented being tricked. They resented seeing a familiar price on the menu and then watching hidden charges appear at checkout, dressed up in polite language. Australians are willing to pay more when the reason is honest. What they will not tolerate is being quietly milked in the fine print. Domino's learned that in the hardest possible way, and every other chain in this country should have taken notes. Some clearly did. Others clearly did not. Which brings us to delivery apps, and this is where things get truly wild. Open Uber Eats or DoorDash right now and look at any menu. The price you see is almost never the price you actually pay. Delivery platforms in Australia typically add between 15 and 30% on top of the in-store menu price, before delivery fees, service fees, and small order charges layer themselves on top of that already inflated number. So a Big Mac meal that costs $15 at the actual counter can quietly become $22 or $23 by the time it lands at your front door. Same food, same kitchen, same crew, different price because you chose comfort over the drive. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has been quietly looking into Uber Eats, particularly around exclusive deals it has struck with major chains. Rival platforms and retailers have raised concerns that these exclusive arrangements lock smaller competitors out of the market. Menulog shut down its Australian operations in November. Deliveroo left the country back in 2022. That leaves Uber Eats and DoorDash carving up most of the market between them. When two players hold that much control, there's very little pressure keeping their markups honest. There's no third choice waiting to undercut them. There is no serious competition forcing the price down. You either accept it or you do not order. And that leads us to a much darker part of the story, one that almost never appears in an advertising campaign. Cheap fast food has always come from somewhere, and in Australia, a real portion of it has come from underpaid workers. Collins Foods, the largest KFC operator in the country, was hit with a $1.2 million back pay settlement after payroll failures left workers without their full legal entitlements. Domino's has faced repeated Fair Work Ombudsman audits over systemic underpayment across its franchise network. National research into worker exploitation found store owners paying staff flat cash rates below the legal minimum wage, deducting money from pay packets without clear explanation, and in some documented cases, pressuring international students to hand over tens of thousands of dollars. None of that ever shows up on the menu board. None of it appears next to the smiling mascot in the ad. It appears years later in a regulator's press release, long after the damage has already been done, long after the workers involved have moved on with their trust in employers permanently broken. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Every dollar a company saves by underpaying the teenager making your burger is $1 it did not have to find somewhere else. Every underpaid shift is a hidden subsidy propping up the illusion of cheap food. So the fast food you remember as being genuinely affordable was never quite as clean a deal as the marketing wanted you to believe. It was cheap, partly because someone behind the counter was quietly wearing the cost. Now, pause with me for a moment. If your jaw has tightened even slightly reading through all of this, do me a favor and hit that like button, not as a habit, but as a signal. Every like tells the algorithm that this story matters, and the algorithm is exactly how it reaches the next family sitting in a drive-thru right now, staring at a screen, wondering how a Tuesday night dinner turned into a $60 decision. Your tap is small, its ripple is not. Let us move to something you have probably felt but never quite been able to prove: shrinkflation. For years, this was a supermarket problem. Smaller chip packets, shorter cereal boxes, the same price on the shelf, but somehow less product inside the box. Choice Australia has documented dozens of these cases across grocery brands, and the federal government even opened a formal consultation, looking at forcing companies to clearly disclose when a product shrinks while its price stays the same or rises. Fast food has largely avoided that same public spotlight, because portion sizes are harder to weigh and compare than something sealed in plastic. But if you have been paying attention, you already know the pattern. Burger patties feel thinner, nugget pieces look smaller, chip portions that used to overflow the little bag now barely fill half of it. Some people have even started comparing photos on their phones from a few years ago to what lands in the bag today, and the difference is not imagined. It is visible. The bun still looks the same on the outside. The wrapper looks the same, but inside, something has quietly shrunk. Research from money.com.au found something fascinating. When Australians were asked directly, most of them said they would actually prefer a clear price rise. 62% of baby boomers and 57% of millennials said they would rather see the truth on the menu than open a smaller box. That tells you exactly what people are really angry about. It is not the price alone. It is the sense of being lied to. It is the feeling of being gaslit by your own dinner, told that nothing has changed, while the physical evidence in your hand quietly says otherwise. And now we come to the part that often gets skipped, but really should not. What is actually inside all of this food? Since 2022, larger Australian food companies have faced growing pressure to be transparent about their ingredients, and the picture that has emerged is not a comfortable one. A landmark Australian study found that Australians whose diets included large amounts of ultra-processed food were 61% more likely to be classified as obese. That research pulled data from more than 7,400 adults nationally. A separate study looked at grocery purchases between 2015 and 2019. They found that ultra-processed foods made up the majority of everything Australian households were buying across that entire 5-year window. The heaviest reliance sat with the lowest income households, and their improvement over time was the smallest. That is not just a health issue, that is an economic one too. The cheapest options quietly became the least nourishing options. Fast food fits squarely in the ultra-processed category. Refined sugars, industrial oils, starches, plus colors, flavors, and additives. Researchers at Deakin have publicly called for advertising bans aimed at children, targeted taxation of ultra-processed products, and clear warning labels. None of that currently exists in any strong, enforceable form in Australia. And the truth is, this conversation was never about one specific burger. It is about the fact that ultra-processed food now makes up close to half of what the average Australian eats in a single day. One drive-thru run is not a rare treat sitting outside a healthy routine. For many families, it is simply another block in a pattern that has been building. Now here is where it gets even more interesting, because if fast food genuinely had to cost what it now costs, you would expect every competitor to be raising prices. Guzman y Gomez has been aggressively expanding, growing to 237 restaurants by the end of 2025. Their stock market listing valued the company at around $2.2 billion, the largest restaurant listing in ASX history. Industry analysts have openly said that McDonald's can still undercut Guzman y Gomez by 20 to 30% on comparable items just because of pure scale. Read that carefully. That means Macca's clearly has room to move on price. It just chooses not to for the regular customer. It saves that pricing flexibility for moments when a competitor gets loud enough to become a threat. Wendy's returned to Australia in 2025. When brand new entrants can build their growth story around being cheaper or more transparent, that tells you exactly how much room those giants had all along, which flows straight into the next uncomfortable truth. McDonald's is slowly losing the argument that it is even the best or most reliable version of what it once dominated. A YouGov survey found McDonald's ranked third when people were asked which chain serves the best burger, sitting behind flame-grilled rivals. City analyst Sam Teeger noted that McDonald's Australian same-store sales growth in late 2025 actually outpaced rivals due to aggressive cut-price competition. That single fact is important. It proves that when Macca's decides the fight matters, it absolutely can compete hard on value. So the higher prices you see day to day are not a company doing its best against unavoidable costs. They are a company with real pricing flexibility. Take a breath here. because this next stretch matters. If you are still with me this deep into the video, thank you, genuinely. Do one small thing before you keep watching. Follow the channel, because the next few videos are going to break down which brands are raising prices fastest. Now let us stack another layer on top of everything you have already heard. The supermarket squeeze. The ACCC is set to begin actively monitoring Kohl's and Woolworths. The supermarket got more expensive. The fast food chain got more expensive. The escape hatch was closing slowly from the inside. Australia's fast food and takeaway industry reached a total value of $29.7 billion in the 2025 to 2026 financial year. The industry's total dollar value kept climbing, and yet people were measurably visiting less often. Prices per visit rose faster than the visits fell. Major franchises, particularly McDonald's, KFC, and Domino's, successfully passed food and wage inflation directly onto consumers through menu pricing. They are successfully transferring those costs onto you and still delivering profits to their shareholders every quarter, calling it a normal response to inflation. First, always check the combo price against ordering the same items individually. Sometimes, buying separately is cheaper if you actually stop and do the maths. Second, compare the in-store price to the delivery app price before you tap order. That 20 to 30% markup is rarely shown clearly. Third, keep an eye on portion size the same way you would check a unit price sticker. If a chain is giving you less, say so out loud in reviews. Do not let a glowing screen and a friendly voice through a speaker convince you that what you are being charged is normal or fair. You are living inside a slow, quiet, deliberate transfer of wealth from your family's dinner budget into the earnings reports of some of the largest food companies. Fast food was built on a promise: cheap, fast, reliable, in that exact order. Speed is still there. Reliability is fading. And cheap, honestly, is almost gone. Whether that promise ever comes back depends less on the executives in the boardroom and more on the person standing at the counter deciding if it is worth paying. Next time that total flashes up on the screen and something inside your chest tightens, remember that feeling is instinct. It is your gut telling you the truth. So next time you pull into that drive-through lane, take 3 seconds before you order. Look at the number. Actually look at it. Ask yourself honestly whether the company has earned that price, or whether they are simply counting on you being too tired and too hungry to notice. Because the moment you start noticing, the whole game starts to change, until the numbers finally shift back toward the people they were always supposed to serve. You.